One of the most important stories in residential real estate right now is the fight between Compass and Northwest MLS. On the surface, it looks like a regional legal dispute. But if you're a broker, a team leader, or just someone running agents inside of a brokerage, this is much bigger than that. It's really a fight over how homes should be marketed, who gets access to listing inventory, and what role MLS cooperation still plays in today's market. Let's start with the basic issue. Compass has been pushing a phased marketing strategy that gives sellers options before a home goes fully live to a broader market. Northwest MLS says that approach creates a closed system, hides inventory from the public and from competing brokers, and it can distort important data like days on market and price history. Compass says sellers deserve flexibility and that brokers should be able to carry out the marketing strategy their client wants without being blocked by MLS rules. That's why this story matters. It's not just about policy, it's about the value proposition of a brokerage itself. If your brokerage says, we can create unique exposure, protect your privacy, and control how your listing hits the market, that's your one model. If your brokerage says broad exposure and transparency create the strongest outcome and the most competitive environment, that's another model. What we're seeing right now is those two models colliding in public. And here's where it gets real for brokers. When these fights happen, they do not stay in the courtroom. They flow straight into the listing appointments, the agent scripts, office policy, and risk management. Suddenly, the question is not just what your agents prefer. The question becomes, what are they allowed to do? How are they describing it to sellers? And are they creating legal exposure for the brokerage? Washington just made this even more serious. The state passed SB 6091, which takes effect June 11th of this year, 2026. The law prohibits brokers from marketing residential properties to an exclusive group of buyers or brokers unless the property is also concurrently marketed to the general public and other brokers, with a narrow health and safety exception. That means in Washington, this conversation is no longer just philosophical. It's increasingly statutory. Now, step back and think about the broader brokerage challenge. For years, brokers have been trying to answer a hard question. How do we differentiate in a market where so much looks the same to the consumer? Some firms have leaned into private networks, office exclusives, and pre-market exposure as a way to say, we have something different, or we have something curated. We have more control. On the other side, MLSs and transparency advocates argue that broad exposure protects consumers, supports fair competition, and gives sellers the best shot at maximum value. Northwest MLS's counterclaims go right to that argument. They allege that limiting exposure can suppress the so-called public auction effect and potentially reduce seller proceeds. They also allege the strategy can create a two-tier market where one set of buyers gets fuller access and the public gets a smaller, delayed view of inventory. Whether those claims ultimately prevail is for the courts to decide. But from a broker standpoint, the risk is obvious. If a strategy can be portrayed as reducing visibility, distorting market history, or favoring insiders, then it can create compliance, training, and reputational challenges fast. At the same time, Compass has its own argument, and brokers should understand it. The company says consumers want more choice and flexibility, and that brokers have a fiduciary duty to their clients. That argument will resonate with a lot of agents because many believe the seller should be able to decide how much exposure they want and when. If a seller wants privacy, a slower rollout, or tighter control over early access, many brokers instinctively feel that should be their call. So what should brokers take away from all this? First, your listing policy needs to be clear, not vague, not assumed, clear. Your agents should know exactly what is permitted, how to present options to sellers, and what disclosures or documentations may be needed. Second, your training needs to catch up. A lot of broker risk does not come from bad intent. It comes from inconsistent messaging. One agent says private exposure creates leverage. Another agent says broad exposure creates leverage. One says office exclusives are strategic. Another says they're risky. If your office is not aligned, you're inviting confusion. Third, your value proposition has to be stronger than access alone. If the industry keeps moving toward broader transparency rules, then firms that build too much of their identity around controlled access may need to rethink how they compete. That does not mean the private listing idea disappears. It means the brokerage has to get better at explaining why its process benefits the client and fits within the law. And then fourth, this is a leadership issue. Broker owners are no longer just managing agents. They're managing market interpretation. They're helping agents make legal sense of changes. policy shifts, and consumer trust concerns in real time. My view is simple. Every broker in the country should be watching this case, even if they never operate in Washington, because this is where the industry is heading. More scrutiny, more consumer education, more pressure to justify how listings are marketed, more tension between innovation and transparency, and that is the real takeaway. The future brokerage model may not be built on who controls the most listings. It may be built on who can best explain their process, protect the client, stay compliant, and still deliver a competitive advantage. That's why this story matters. It's not just a legal fight. It's a blueprint for the next phase of brokerage leadership.